Hello, guys. This is Kevin Stoda. It's been a while since I gave you a program, and I'll try to scoot up close enough that you see me. Um, I've want to give a live program right now and explain why, in order to save the Republican Party, someone should or must run against Trump and the cronies who support him blindly. They're putting in a terrible bet. They're betting the whole grand old party's history and tradition and any relation that most Americans can have to it on Trump winning an election or on overcoming impeachment or whatever. And he doesn't even stand for a lot of things that most people in America vote for. Again, this is Kevin Stoda, and I'm going to read from three articles I've been working on the reason why such a candidate is needed. Then I will conclude by indicating I am running, although the seriousness of my running currently could be in question. We're hoping to drum up some other people who know how to run for office. I do have a lot of experience, especially internationally, and matter of fact, working abroad nearly 30 years of my adult life. And I could do a lot better at building relationships as I speak German, French, a little French, Spanish, and some other languages like Japanese, Arabic, to some degree. All right, here's the first article. I'll read it to you. If I were to run in the Republican primaries for president right now or in the coming months, these items would be on my platform. Yes, the chorus was saying, can the GOP be saved? Can the GOP be saved? The players indicate that it can be done if they put a progressive candidate on the ticket to show how many votes an anti-war progressive could siphon off of the supposedly solid Trump base that dominates the GOP today. If I were to run as a GOP progressive, an alternative for many others who feel left out, I would start by taking items that are already necessary and popular for most Americans. I would be busily pushing things like the transformation of our economy into something more sustainable. For Midwesterners, I would copy Eisenhower, whose 1950s platform espoused in domestic affairs a policy of modern republicanism that occupied a middle ground between liberal Democrats and conservative wing of the Republican Party. Eisenhower continued also some or many of the New Deal programs. He expanded Social Security and prioritized the balanced budget over tax cuts. And we would return to the progressive tax policies of that era that made America better going into the 1960s than it had ever been in many ways. It was committed to change and reform. The country was under the Republican leadership at that time and even the Democratic ones. On the other hand, we would turn from the militarization of the U.S. economy that's occurred over the last 85 years. Eisenhower only saw the perils of this path in his final address as president in 1961. By that time, it was too late. We need to turn to forward thinking and stop putting off the big infrastructure and social spending needs of our nation. We should work on this and find the money elsewhere in our budget. Instead of the New Deal being my starting point, I would propose to implement major infrastructural projects and investments in communities through works with state and federal agencies, along with local communities, activists, and leaders. The GOP needs a Green New Deal infrastructure plan that empowers all American communities. Someone in the Republican Party needs to be having this vision. I have it, and I can run in the Republican Party. I can run in Democrats, but right now, let's say I'm running in the Republicans because they just don't have anything going up against Trump on this, and I think they need it to give the party a chance to exist into the rest of the century. Unlike Ike, Nixon, Reagan, Bush, W. Bush, and Trump, I would circle up the Department of Defense and its stakeholders, that's the military-industrial complex, as well as the congressional complex, and see what they all could kitty up to rebuild American infrastructure in the 20th century and beyond. We know that a commitment to reducing overall military and national security spending will get us further in terms of getting a greener economy off the ground, which will make our country more secure. Even the DoD admits this is an important um, spending priority in the United States and in the DoD's own budget. This or planning. This contrasts with the bully our neighbor approach of the Trump administration and several other presidents. The DoD has recognized the dangers of these environmental uh, issues and also the overreach of the militarization of the global and American economy. And this is needs to be transformed as quickly as possible into an environmental friendly one for our society and the world. I would be an environmentalist candidate. I'll say that again. I would be an environmentalist candidate and stand on the shoulders of Theodore Roosevelt and even Richard Nixon in this sphere. But I would also push harder than Barack Obama and other recent presidents to oversee the that climate change is taken seriously in terms of agency oversight and public spending are concerned. Our land is protected for our progeny. This must be done. Our greener economy needs to be constructed. I should note here, however, I would reduce overall commitment to fiddling with other countries' domestic policies and social development, which has been the mainstay of presidencies since Truman and Eisenhower. This turning back the clock practice makes more enemies and refugees than friends. This makes the world unsustainable and unstable. In summary, uh, the good neighbor policy that I would advocate will give us more peace and security. It will reduce enemies in the region and the world. National security monies can be better used to develop better infrastructure, to make friends, and rebuild America. That's the end of part one of the message I have about why somebody needs to run uh, in the Republican parties for president as a progressive. These items, other items, will also be in platform I foresee. Recently, I began this series, but I would like to focus now on what other people in other parties have also suggested that a good progressive candidate must have. And I think anybody running against Donald Trump needs to stand clearly against him so that there's not wishy-washy uh, choices being made. Uh, in part one, I focused on what the more progressive Republican presidential candidates in the past have done. I talked about Eisenhower. I mentioned Theodore Roosevelt. I even mentioned Nixon. Um, I would also advocate a reduction of dependence on the military, congressional, industrial complex for our entire economy. I would transform it into environmental protection and spending on environmental issues and enforcement thereof. I would return the whole nation to progressive or fair tax systems to fund all these projects, and I would reduce the overall national debt. Um, Number four, I would implement infrastructural projects immediately that improve social, economic, and environmental situations in America. This includes schools. It includes new training centers. This includes uh, access points for people in need of help, um, good governments in general. Also, building relationships with states and local governments. I noted how some of the more progressive presidents in the past, including uh, Theodore Roosevelt, stood up for many of these goals, initiatives, and projects and related laws that we're talking about as progressive. I also noted how some of these presidents, including D.D. Eisenhower, took progressive initiatives from Democrats and ran with them. With this perspective of the Eisenhower era, I decided to share in this part two. If I were to run in the Republican primary for president, these items on my platform, these other items. Here are some positions I would also include. Number one among them, private prisons. I would eliminate them and come up with a better system that would have humaner implementation of law and order across the U.S. Number two, I would advocate and implement policy that would oversee affordable housing, enable construction, funding, in some cases rent control, and certainly use taxes to curb speculation. big. I would bring number three. I would bring back the Glass-Steagall. Did you know that this was introduced in 1932 when Republicans still held the presidency? If Hoover had been a progressive, he would have signed it. We will. Cash bail reform. That's number four, and we would end it and reduce the number of court cases that are being backlogged by getting more judges in the courts. We would also have other more financial supports for the courts, and see that the states also did it. The Constitution of 1780s surely demanded it. Number five, we would scrap the disparities between cocaine and marijuana and this sort of thing, which has led to a large number of blacks and brown people's skin colors ending up in prison versus white. Election security. Let's talk about we need to mandate and demand that this be in practice and that paper ballots be in effect even if, even if computers are used. Besides election security, number seven would be income inequality. We would raise taxes on the wealthy, create new social programs. 8, paid reforms for parental leave must also be in effect, and as well as other broader leave plans for families to support them. Number 9, reparations. We would study reparations a little bit more and discuss them more openly so that some common agreement can be made. And then we would implement structure and individual reforms, as well as educational and trades programs, creating entitlements and funding for state and business level, at the state and business level to decrease costs, but to also implement more widely in a great variety settings, such a reparation of sorts. The Republican Party did promise 40 acres and a mule, and this was basically not given out across the country, and in many places, blacks were blocked out even if they were given a property. Student debt, number 10. We cancel all student debt and do what we can as a nation at local, federal, and state, as well as business levels, to decrease the costs for those desiring higher education and training at the tertiary level. At this point in history, because of high costs, we have a large number of people not going to school, as has been the case in the past. Number 11, teacher pay. I would use the bully pulpit to increase teacher pay across the country and promote state and local progressivism to implement a shift from charter schools and private schools to citywide and statewide supports for all local schools. Number 12, I would talk here about campaign finance reform. Unlimited spending should not be allowed in politics, so I would work with states and federal level to change the Constitution to make it clear that corporations are not people and they should not have more power than people before the government. Number 13, electoral college. The electoral college should be eliminated and immediately instituted in this country should be a ranked choice voting system for the presidency, setting an example for change at the local levels in this way. Number 14, energy policy. We have to look at the nuclear power situation again, which is support closing down existing nuclear power plants. If there can be some newer ones developed that are completely newer and smaller and less destructive than the ones we have currently in terms of not knowing what to do with the waste, we could pursue those, but get rid of the older ones. Oil and gas drilling, banning fracking everywhere should be the way we go forward. Continue with the energy policy. We should reduce carbon emissions, impose government regulations to see that this is done. That would be in addition to possible taxes that we mentioned before. Number 15, agricultural security and progressive development. Farm economy needs help. We need to break up the agribusiness in many regions or most regions of the country and help farmers switch over to a new sort of farm economy and more sustainable one. We must save our aquifers, for example. Farming and climate change. We need to pay our farmers to adopt climate-friendly practices. Uh, let's continue with number 16, guns. Let's talk guns. Assault weapons. I support a voluntary buyback program and want to reduce all sales in the USA of assault weapons. We should strictly regulate them. There should be next background checks. Universal background checks are a good thing. Number 17. Let's talk about insurance and medical costs. ACA coverage should be expanded. That is a form of all-in-one Medicare for all. Drug costs support. I support negotiating the Medicare international reference pricing and promoting generics across the board. Not finally, but number 19, transportation. We certainly need to work on boosting our infrastructure for transportation across the country. And we should do this through corporate and progressive taxes, reduction of spending on NSA, DOD, and all these in order to secure a future that's more sustainable and more, of course, secure. This should include defense spendings. We need to slash the defense budget as quickly as possible to get the stakeholders involved in transforming our economy and reducing excessive security overreaches abroad, which are causing us to lose more money at home that we should be using for this development that we need now. We need to be leaders in the world in this green transformation. Finally, overseas deployments. We need to greatly reduce troop footprint abroad and reduce excessive security overreaches that create unwanted backwash or blowback. This is what I told you back about in the 1980s when Reagan began to fiddle with Central America and then reach into Eastern Europe, that there would be blowback. And the way we supported certain groups in the Middle East was bound to make it worse after the Gulf War. Overseas deployment, besides reducing troop imprint, we must help also provide transition money and training for other alternatives, especially for companies like Boeing, like Lockheed Martin, to transfer their research into land transformation, for example. Super high-speed trains in the United States are well needed by now, decades after other countries have had it. In addition, we won't waste money on the wall and focus on the things that help people move, not what stops them from moving across the United States and North America. Because if we're going to have a free trade, we're going to have some sort of movement of peoples, and that's needed. And we need to bring that into a better security plan for how we can help the states south of us to keep people in their country rather than exporting them all the time, as they have been doing for nearly 30, 40 years, since the Reagan administration first sent massive support into Central America for regimes that are questionable, and many of them we still find questionable. The 20th point or area of investment that I see or decision making in terms of governance concerns taxes. First, the capital gains tax needs to be increased significantly and progressively. Corporate income tax also needs to be eliminated, especially for offshoring. Wall Street taxes need to be also taxed. All these trades, just a minimal tax on them would be very supportive of the economy. It would also help reduce some of the stress we have when the markets go up and down so much. Wealth taxes are needed. That would be progressive, and that should help us to have, again, a more stable country, because with the lack of a middle class, we are not only killing ourselves, but making life hard for many Americans to even dream of moving up. Um, let's talk about tech and competition too. We need to have a breakup of some of the large tech companies. We need to break up some of the other large oil companies and banks. Uh, Rural broadband should be supported, and we need to create a public option for such a broadband uh, at all levels of government and municipalities or regions in the United States. We need to spend on green infrastructure as we did in the rural development programs of the 1930s, 40s, 50s that made America great. And we should see what we can do to reduce our climate footprints in doing so. Um, this costs money, and I think the stakeholders understand that. Everyone from the defense contractors to those who've been dependent on petroleum understand this. Let's talk also about NAFTA and the USMCA. We need to demand changes to USMCA, but we need to do a better job than what this current administration is doing. I should add, I have more to share about specific foreign policy initiatives in part 3 in this series, which I'll read next. I should note that 75% plus of this platform that I've just given today in part 2 parallels or copies Bernie Sanders, but that is to be expected. All candidates look at what it takes to do well in prior elections, and Sanders did well in many heartland states, including Missouri and Kansas, where I'm from. So why not appropriate the best for that which the GOP party can digest? And I'm saying that people can digest a lot of this the platform that I've suggested today. Now, the third part of the writings that I'm sharing from Op-Ed News, explaining why a progressive candidate is needed to run head-on against Trump and the mainstream Republican leadership at this current time, if the party's going to survive past 2020. In the old days, we knew that we could have conservatives like William Allen White or Senator Bora of Idaho, or Hiram Johnson of California, or even Fighting Bob LaFollette. We could have conservatives who were able to push for progressive views and reforms. And we need to return to that kind of America where people aren't just kicked out of the big tent parties because they don't play football with this team. We want to play together, but we want to allow a wholer, a bigger, a more in-depth party than what's currently happening, where we're killing off our possible votes in many sectors. So here's what I have to say finally. If I would offer to help the GOP save itself from destruction by throwing my hat into the ring as a progressive candidate for the presidency of the United States, I need to ask you guys, would you help me against Trump, who would threaten to kill me or threaten to have me killed, as many supporters of his have done in the past? If I were to run in the Republican Party, you need to relook at the points and exams, articles I just wrote, part 1 and 2. They can both be found in December 2019 Op-Ed News online. And I will start this next section by noting a quote Barbara Tuchman wrote over 30 years ago. She looked at the Republican Party and said, what is wrong with the Republican Party? Why can't people run? She said, once upon a time, progressives had same meaning as liberal, but they were not a fringe group, but important, determined men. They were at the heart of the party, with Fighting Bob LaFollette, governor of and later senator from Wisconsin, who I mentioned before. He was joined by Senator Hiram Johnson of California, Senator Bora of Idaho, Norris of Nebraska, Beveridge of Indiana. They were followed by teachers, city councilors, legislators, writers, and most articulate of all, by the journalist William Allen White of Kansas, editor of the Emporia Gazette. which he had made famous by his 1986 editorial, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" If I would try to run as progressive against Trump, I would indicate the following first. On my father's side of the family, which from Illinois and Wisconsin, there's a long lineage of Republican voters dating back into the 19th century. My great-great-grandfather Stoddard died as a Civil War vet and had voted to free the slaves with Lincoln. However, in 1980, my first year in which I was able to vote, I turned 18 that year, I quickly determined to not vote for Ronald Reagan, but instead I voted naively for the independent candidate, John Anderson, who had been a Republican and who had originally run earlier in the 1980 primaries against Reagan and Bush for president. He argued that social programs need not be cut, and environmental protection projects of the 70s and 80s also needed not to be cut. He offered to keep progressives in the party and to save money for the rich and war makers. Saving money for the rich and war makers was not going to work for the greater good of all people. He may have made some mistakes in later years in supporting Reagan, but I voted for him that year, as did 7 or 8% of the people across the United States. But I did not see a future where all this continued spending on war would help us out. I was born in 62, and I grew up in the 70s when less and less money was being spent. And there was more hope for the future, real hope, not this rah-rah-rah stuff of the Reagan era. Nevertheless, from 1980 through 2017, I have often been enrolled as in either an independent or as a Republican. Most often in Kansas as a Republican. I voted for Senator Kassebaum numerous times in Kansas. I voted in numerous primaries at city and state levels for Republicans or independents. Nonetheless, over the nearly 40 years period, I have never voted for a single Republican candidate for president. The system's just not letting anybody near being progressive to run for office, and no one willing to cut spending or cut the footprint we have abroad, which is creating refugees left and right. On the one hand, I understand that currently over 50% of current Republicans think that Donald Trump, a most shameless abuser of Christians and Christianity for his political whims, is or was a better president than Abraham Lincoln. But there are 50% of us, or nearly 50% of us, who still feel that Abraham Lincoln was a much better president, a much more moral person than Donald Trump. In short, we consider the others a little bit insane in their, let's see how many lies we can get ourselves to believe, so sort of GOP leadership that we have today. So with the 47% of the GOP behind me already who support getting rid of Trump, I smell a window for rescuing this party. It is now clear that if the GOP is to survive well into the 2020s, it needs to make its tent larger and allow Republican voters to consider someone who challenges the typical Republican demagogues and offers a better and more progressive path for Americans, America, and the world than has been offered by the GOP in the last 40 years. Starting now in the primaries, a progressive like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and even Andrew Young must be placed under consideration for GOP voters in the primary. I think, though, that we need to take the battle to the home front with the presidential primaries, too, and of the GOP, the base. If you want to cross over and vote for Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, or even Andrew Young, you can. But I would suggest that you, I think Andrew Young's more of a libertarian, by the way. I would hope that you would support some brave soul who will stand up and run as a GOP candidate against Trump, who is, a person who is progressive and has got great moral courage. But fear is heavy, and many people are afraid to run against Trump, even though 47% of the Republicans apparently want him out. In summary, let's not forget that a lot of GOP voters in Missouri and Kansas almost pushed Barry Sanders to the top of the Democratic Party ticket in 2016 primaries, i.e., where voters were often uh, able to cross over and to vote in other people's primaries, other parties' primaries. Since then, many war veterans coming home from American wars have become and shown that they are more tired of our endless surveillance and overreach around the world. Unless the wealthy want to pay to have their sons go to the war, uh, they need to reduce the footprint abroad. And they should also keep us out of wars that are unnecessary and not for petroleum, etc. Um, so in support of these young people who are coming home from war, or even older middle-aged people who are getting out of the military, I want you to know we will bring the troops home. At the same time, build stable global relationships around the world to get things done. And then we will, at the same time, also implement a Green New Deal here at home and add real infrastructure spending for schools, transportation, and housing. Get this all back on course. Get America better again. It's time that the grand old party became grand again. Please consider voting for me or some other progressive in the primaries. I'm asking this of all Republicans, and I'm even asking those voters, such as those who've been eliminated from voter registers around the country, to enroll as GOP, Republican Party primary voters in the coming months, and to vote for a progressive. If not, cross over and vote for a Democrat if you'd like, or another independent who's willing to run with more progressive issues. But I'm throwing my head in the ring against Donald Trump right now. I hope you find someone like me who can be your leader, but I'm putting the bug in your ear. So I hope you can make a decision. And instead of having what's the matter with the Republican Party, which has been going on for 30 plus years, we say, oh, look at the change. Look at the positive change that could happen in the Republican Party if it wants to survive into this next decade, or at least into the next part of the century. It would be gone otherwise. The environment's too important. The world needs saving. Our infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. We need to bring the boys home. We need to make friends around the world. And we need to stop playing this idea that magically money will filter or trickle up from the bottom, because it already has, and not in a good way. We need it to trickle down. No, that's not happened. We need to build a better America by using the instruments I've explained in the 3 parts of this op-ed series. And I ask you to review them. I'll put those links at the bottom of this email. Are there any questions? Well, I'll be waiting your questions. What are you up to otherwise, listeners? Okay. Yeah, I think it's true. The Republicans should be allowing the impeachment of Trump to go through in the Senate, but I think it's even better if they wait and let the more charges against Trump be built up over the next coming months. On the other hand, we need to start peeling back those people who are blind Trump supporters who don't stand up for what the Constitution says about how we're to treat each other or people in this nation. That includes crude words and language from our president. We need to censor him for the bad language he's using, and we need to also consider changes in Republican leadership across the board. Again, vote for me or somebody else who's a good candidate, who can be that force to save the GOP this time around. Otherwise, we have to start thinking of a new name of another party. If the GOP won't go back to some of its more progressive roots and stop working on the 1876 decision to um, end the Reconstruction and make a deal with the Southern uh, Dixiecrats at that time, and we need to move on where we can work with the people who are more progressive across the board. We need to say where America should be going. We need to lift up and not tear down. We need to not build walls, but we need to build real bridges that work and function. And we need to get our country integrated into the world in a way that doesn't lead to permanent war. Just backing off and pulling out of countries and trying to hit them over the head by negotiating as Trump does is very short term thinking. It's not going to help the world or our country in the long term. Failing to make an agreement on green technology should have been a no brainer for Trump. He should have made it last year, or excuse me, in 2019, as the offers came forward. Why? Because it fits in with his infrastructure spending concept. Problem is, how do you fund it? And this pretending to love the military and fighting with the general stuff is not playing well in America. It's not playing well with the military. And we need to end it and start spending on infrastructure at home that will really work and make life good for the boys who are coming home or the women who are coming home from wars or from bases. I think we have something like 175 bases, and there's 175 countries with bases in it, and we need to reduce that number by quite a bit and make friends. But we don't need to have military bases or contracts or oversight beyond the normal in order to make friends. We can promote anything from the Peace Corps to development projects and get more for our money in the long term. Sure, in the short term, you can blow your way into a country, but getting out and stopping blowback is much more expensive financially as well as in terms of human life. I really love my fellow Americans and I want them to have a better life and I want the world to have a better life too. I don't know about this guy, Trump. Please clean house. If you like to color my hair, you can vote for me. Um, I'm also progressive and I have a plan. I don't care if I took half of it from the Democrats who are running for office. I think it's something that people in the Republican Party can vote for. And I want to show them. I want to show others. Thank you for listening. Have a good day. This is Kevin Stoda in Kansas City, Missouri, signing off and waiting for your comments. And I'd like to share this with as many people as possible. So if you have seen part of it, share it with them. Thank you. Have a good day. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.